It's the new year, and you know what that means. We're going to be delving into even more stories about some of the most troublesome tales in the entertainment industry. But it also means we can start setting up new goals for ourselves in 2024, like I've been doing with partaking in less sugar and more protein via Magic Spoon. Whether you want to relive the fun Saturday morning cereal vibes of your youth, or need to fuel yourself for an upcoming bout in the King of Iron Fist tournament, you can't go wrong with Magic Spoon's delicious flavors, or their new cereal treat bars, which come in both marshmallow and, my favorite, chocolatey peanut butter. In fact, I'm something of a CPB fiend in general, so I usually mix and match them both in the mornings or whenever I'm craving a wholesome late-night snack. So if you're looking to do the same and start your year off on the right track, use my code McMuscles at checkout or scan the QR code on your screen for $5 off your custom box order. And if you're not satisfied with it, Magic Spoon will refund your purchase, no questions asked. Thanks again goes out to Magic Spoon for sponsoring today's video, and without further ado, let's enter the Tekken. Hello and welcome to another fact-consisting and iron-fisting episode of What Happened, the investigative YouTube-style pop culture media show that's apparently started to make a habit of covering video game-based movies. Now, within the sphere of said movies lies the mighty fighting game, which, when compared to the likes of the platformer or the first-person shooter, has a stranglehold on less than stellar adaptations. While the early 90s produced some films that were not well-liked at the time, such as Van Damme's coke-fueled take on Street Fighter and the flabbergasting Mortal Kombat Annihilation, it was the late 2000s which resulted in even more dire output like Dead or Alive, Street Fighter, The Legend of Chun-Li, The King of Fighters, and our subject today, which just might have the messiest story of them all. So strap on your gloves and spike up your hair as I answer the question, what happened to the Tekken motion picture? Yeah, not that one. Yeah, that one.
Get ready for the next battle.
After headhunting some people who worked on Virtua Fighter, Namco were riding high off the success of the first Tekken, which busted all the blocks outside game centers across Japan and translated well to the rest of the world. Tekken then very quickly became the hottest 3D button basher of the late 90s, so it was only a matter of time before someone would attempt to adapt it into a live-action feature film. In the pages of Luke Owen's fantastic book, Lights, Camera, Game Over, How Video Game Movies Are Made, it was revealed that a little-known Hollywood producer by the name of Stephen Paul was the one to make such an attempt, and this is due to a very specific connection he had within Namco. I was fortunate enough to have a relationship with a fellow by the name of Masaya Nakamura. I had met him many years ago when I was young and he was younger, and we became very good friends. We would go around and play on all the different games, and one of the games we played was Tekken. We had a little tournament, and that's when I said, we should make a movie about this. So, thanks to his relationship with an industry legend and the founder of Namco, Paul was just handed the movie rights to one of their biggest IPs, and while senior Namco staff would have some oversight, it was Paul's job to get it funded and filmed. Unfortunately, his production company, Crystal Sky Worldwide, is that its real name?
Prestige,
wasn't exactly a power player within Hollywood, as evidenced by their biggest hit being 1999's Baby Geniuses. Paul, however, saw Tekken as his company's ticket into the big time, which is totally giving me Crazy Larry and Threshold Entertainment vibes. While it then took a while to become official, in 2002 Namco put out a press release saying they had Dimension Films on board to distribute and a $60 million budget, which would have made it the most expensive video game movie at that time. After meeting with a number of writers, Paul eventually hired a duo by the names of Mike Werb and another Mike, Michael Collery, who both had credits on such films as It Doesn't Matter. These were the guys who wrote Face Off. It all comes back to Face Off. In Lights, Camera, Game Over, the writers explained how everyone behind the production all agreed on one thing. They didn't want to clone Mortal Kombat, so there would be no mysterious island, no supernatural elements, and lean more into science fiction. The duo also admitted they had never heard of Tekken before, but once they started getting fist deep into the lore of the Mishima bloodline, they became intrigued by the possibilities. The first draft of the script focused on Jin Kazama discovering his lineage as the grandson of the mighty and feared Heihachi Mishima, who happened to be dying of an unspecified illness. The Tekken tournament functioned as a testing ground for experimental drugs with the hope they'd extend Mishima's life. Collery compared this script to a mix of Star Wars and The Godfather, with martial arts in place of lightsabers or guns, and while Stephen Paul loved the script, it would still need to be approved by Namco. Oddly enough, the only major notes they received back from them was to cut anything provocative involving Nina or Anna Williams, which forced the writers to create an original character for the express purposes of titillation. Now, this is a little weird considering Namco had already given the thumbs up to the extended shower scenes in the Tekken anime and, other stuff, but I digress. Still, that's far from the strangest thing we'll be covering in Tekken's long road to being film, which, if you're counting, was going to take another 7 whole years. With a hefty budget ready to spend, Stephen Paul tried shooting for the stars when it came to casting for Tekken, and 2 of those stars were none other than martial arts legends Jet Li and Jackie Chan, who he sought to sign in major roles. With this in mind, Paul then started to view Tekken as more of a vehicle to finally get Jet and Jackie on screen together for the first time, rather than adapting the Tekken story as faithfully as possible. These initial negotiations included one of the stars playing the villain, which both were hesitant about accepting, so it looked like it was going to take a while to appease all parties. When it came to directors, the first one that was seriously considered was Charles Stone III, who had been recommended by Bob Weinstein of the Weinstein clan. Not familiar with Charles? Well, he directed Drumline, but some of you older fans might know him best as one of the co-creators and director of the seminal Budweiser What's Up commercials. Why him though? Well, because Weinstein's company, Miramax, which owned Dimension, distributed Charles's last film, Paid in Full, which had been a modest success at the time. As it turns out though, Charles Stone was actually a fan of the Tekken series, saying in Lights, Camera, Game Over, "Yoshimitsu was my favorite character because he was the most sci-fi looking, and I found the story to be so bizarre. The overall arc and mythology of the world was so complex. It was like, this happens, and then this happens, and then the brother of the cousin comes in. It was a crazy mishmash of soap operatic drama about power and revenge. It was sensational for me to grab on." Of course, if someone then gets added to the production team and happened to be a fan of Tekken, logic would dictate they would have different ideas on how to best make a movie of it. So when Charles was brought on board the project, he did just that. He felt that the treatment the Mikes had written didn't best capture the source material, and instead wanted to focus on bringing in additional characters as well as placing more emphasis on the King of Iron Fist tournament itself. In Luke Owens' book, the writers felt that Charles just wanted to do a retread of Mortal Kombat, all the way down to traveling to a mysterious island to duke it out. Conversely, when Charles was on a press junket for another film during this period, he claimed quite the opposite, saying, "It will not be anything like Mortal Kombat or any of the Lara Croft movies. You will get the feeling of Bruce Lee's Enter the Dragon. I want the audience to get to know the characters so when they have to battle each other, it will be more dramatic." Now, that's a little odd considering Mortal Kombat, both the game and the first movie, were directly modeled after Enter the Dragon, but hey, I'm just a walking, talking purple skeleton man, what do I know? While Collery and Wern weren't contracted to do any rewrites, they felt compelled to stay on due to how well producer Stephen Paul had been treating them. Paul, desperate for a director to helm the project at this point, simply threw up his hands and said, "Let's just do what Charles wants," which essentially meant meant they had to start the script over from scratch. As per Charles's notes, this version followed multiple characters, started off in San Francisco, and then moved on to Tekken Island. Werb and Collery were not happy with these changes, feeling they were getting away from what everyone was initially excited for and agreed upon. The straw that broke the boxing kangaroo's back, though, was Stephen Paul informing the writers that Stone's contract also gave him the option to do his own writing pass on the script, a clause which he gladly took. Stone then hired his own writing partner, a man named Jesse Berdinka, who instituted further changes. Heihachi's medium-sized military corporation then became a massive conglomerate that ruled a large portion of the world and would sponsor certain athletes to be their mascots in the King of Iron Fist tournament, which was now much more akin to the Olympics. The anger of Beast himself, King was now thrust into a central role as Heihachi's heavy, and was up for a Roy D. Magoo Award via an illegal steroid subplot. Heihachi's role now shifted to him wanting to steal the life force of the tournament participants, another element which Werb and Collery disliked because it once again aped Mortal Kombat. With King now quite prominent, Paul wanted to get Rock the Dwayne Johnson on board, which, while making sense from a physical and background perspective, also didn't make sense because King doesn't really speak and The Rock certainly does.
Shut up, bitch!
Throughout 2004, Stephen Paul had managed to keep both Jet Li and Jackie Chan interested in the project, with the latter now playing Inspector Lei Wulong, and a great example of art imitating life. This pairing of martial arts masters was exciting enough for Sony Pictures to then step in and replace Dimension Films as the distributor for a wide North American release, and represented the peak of Tekken's potential. Because sadly, for Stephen Paul, Charles Stone, and Namkai Bando, it was going to be all downhill from here. With Sony Pictures as the distributor, which made sense given Tekken's close association with the PlayStation, filming was set to finally begin in the back half of 2005, until it wasn't. Charles Stone and Jesse Berdinka maintain that the draft they submitted that year was approved by Stephen Paul and Crystal Sky, but Wern and Collery tell a very different tale, saying Crystal Sky hated it and contracted them for another rewrite that they politely declined, which I can't blame them for, considering Charles kept changing their work. In Lights Camera Game Over, Stone stated that shortly after he had submitted his draft, he began getting gradually squeezed out of the project by an overbearing producer that Paul had hired to write the ship, which ironically had the opposite effect. This producer, Benedict Carver, came over from Screen Gems and would routinely butt heads with both Stone and Berdinka on pretty much everything, especially the script. Things were going so badly that when Carver had hired another writer to take a stab at the script behind Stone's back, Stone decided to drop out from the project altogether, saying he wanted to avoid further drama. That new writer turned out to be Alan B. McElroy, best known for penning Halloween 4: The Return of Michael Myers, Ballistic, X vs. Sever, helping out Todd McFarlane with various Spawn productions, who now desperately needs a lot of help, by the way, and finally, the Brandon Lee vehicle Rapid Fire, which I recall being sick as hell when I saw it as a kid, which probably means it isn't. It's McElroy's work which was maintained for the finished film, and both incorporated and dropped several ideas from previous versions, focusing on Jin again whilst dropping Heihachi as the main villain into a more secondary one, and cutting King altogether in favor of focusing on Kazuya. To complement McElroy's script, Benedict Carver brought aboard someone who was responsible for directing said scripts, namely Dwight Little, who helmed both Halloween 4 and Rapid Fire, along with a ton of TV. While Little and McElroy had a comfortable shorthand together and were both excited to make a martial arts movie, trouble was brewing elsewhere. Due to having lost their original director and an entire year being used to write and rewrite the script once again, Sony got cold feet, pulling out of their distribution agreement with Crystal Sky. When this news hit, the proposed $60 million budget was then electric wind god-fisted out of the ring, which of course raised some concerns with its two biggest stars. When Jackie Chan and Jet Li were informed Tekken no longer had a distributor and the budget had just been dropped into a raging volcano, they abandoned it pretty quickly, moving their long-awaited cinematic pairing onto 2008's disappointing Forbidden Kingdom. So, with no stars attached, Paul therefore couldn't get funding from any major studio, which left him with only one option, which was to simply do it himself. But that obviously was going to have its own drawbacks. Tightening the purse strings was going to change pretty much everything, from the story to the sets and especially to the casting, so they opted to hire mostly unknown actors, but ones with strong martial arts backgrounds. They also took care to cast whomever naturally resembled the characters they'd be playing, because while you can say a lot about the finished film, you can't say that the vast majority of their choices weren't spot on. While he plays it very closely to Shang Tsung and doesn't have a whole lot to do, you can't hate on Cary Hiroyuki Tagawa's performance as Heihachi.
I am Mishima Heihachi. I am Tekken.
Most of the filming took place in an old auditorium in Shreveport, Louisiana, and with some clever set design and some CGI overlays, they were able to make something that vaguely resembled the various exotic locations you'd see in the games, without, actually filming them. Aside from some work visa issues with John Fu, the actor that played Jin Kazama, the actual production of Tekken went relatively smoothly. Its post-production period, however, did not. After filming had wrapped, Stephen Paul was feverishly trying to acquire a new distribution partner for a theatrical run, and when he couldn't, he entered Tekken not into the King of Iron Fist, but the AFM Film Festival, which is meant to show off and broker deals for independent productions. Warner Bros. Japan was interested and secured the rights for much of Asia, but no one was willing to shell out and distribute it in the West, as interest in video game movies was pretty much at an all-time low. Eventually, Anchor Bay stepped in, but was obviously only interested in a straight-to-DVD release, and given there were no other interested parties, Crystal Sky agreed, although this meant a much less lucrative deal than if it had been a theatrical one. Tekken was finally released on August 11, 2010, wherever fine straight-to-DVD action schlock was sold, some 7 years after its original announcement back in 2002. While it's admirable that Stephen Paul and Crystal Sky persevered and got it released, critics were not very enthused with the finished product, with the most generous summation coming from Paul Pritchard of DVD Verdict, saying, "In the grand scheme of things, Tekken bests both Street Fighter movies with ease, but lacks the goofy charm of Mortal Kombat. Had it embraced its roots more openly, the film might well have offered more excitement. As it is, Tekken is just an average action flick with nothing to distinguish it from the rest of the crowd." Tekken game producer and sunglass enthusiast Katsuhiro Harada was decidedly less positive, saying on Twitter that Hollywood movie is terrible. We were not able to supervise that movie. It was a cruel contract. I am not interested in that movie. Not being deterred and still having the movie rights from Namco, Stephen Paul immediately launched into pre-production on a sequel dubbed Tekken Rise of the Tournament, with the director of the original Ong Bak at the helm. Unfortunately, after a year of work though, they weren't able to hammer out a script that they were both happy with, and so the project floundered. That is, until another in-development Crystal Sky production called Agent X presented a unique opportunity, which I'll let Paul explain in an excerpt from Lights Camera Game Over. When we developed it, we didn't know whether we were going to make it as a Tekken sequel or not. We developed the property out, and it was always developed so it could be Tekken or not Tekken. Eventually, they chose the former, with Tekken Kazuya's Revenge acting as a prequel/reboot, but being so generic in its dialogue, story, and characters that in some countries it's pretty much considered an alternative to sleeping medication. Review-wise, it made the first Tekken look like an Oscar contender, with Cinema Craze commenting, "Will test the patience of even the most hardcore fans of the game anxious for a big screen adaptation." Oh man, I can't wait to force Matthew to review this with me. The dry, formulaic plot confused many fans, and Paul admitted in Lights Camera Game Over that mistakes were made. The sequel was a miss. We would have been better off not doing it. Unbelievably, Stephen Paul still has plans to return to the world of Tekken to make another film, feeling the material is strong enough to support it, even though he clearly doesn't have Harada's support. But when you consider that Masaya Nakamura died in 2017, I doubt Stephen Paul's friendship with the Namco founder will get him very far this time around. Tekken has been quite unlucky with adaptations when compared to many of its contemporaries. From the anime movie to both live-action attempts, Blood Vengeance, and then the divisive Netflix series, it really makes you wonder, who's asking for this shit? If you know of any other bone-crunching stories in the video game or movie industries, do let me know in the comments below or enter the arena that is my social media. And if you're interested in any more video game to movie foibles, do check out Lights Camera Game Over, link in the description below. See you next time in the next battle.
I'm here now.